All right, let's dive into one of the most influential and, yeah, controversial ideas in all of philosophy, utilitarianism. It's a theory that basically promises a simple, rational path to a better world. But, as you're about to see, that path is filled with some seriously thorny questions.
You've almost certainly heard this phrase before, the greatest good for the greatest number. It's the famous slogan, right? It's simple, it's catchy, and, on the surface, it sounds like a pretty obvious guide for doing the right thing. But what happens when you really push that idea to its logical conclusion?
Because once you start to pull at that thread, things get complicated. What does good actually mean? How in the world do you measure it? And maybe most importantly, what happens when the greatest good for the majority comes at a terrible, terrible cost for the minority?
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with what utilitarianism actually is. Then we'll break it down into its 5 core ideas. From there, we'll look at a major debate inside the theory itself, tackle the toughest objections people have against it, and finally, see how this whole thing plays out in the real world.
So first up, what is utilitarianism really? Let's get past that catchy slogan and dig into what the theory is all about.
So here's the formal definition. At its heart, utilitarianism says an act is right or wrong based entirely on whether it maximizes overall well-being. Now, the key words there are entirely and maximization. It means your intentions, the rules you follow, none of that really matters. At the end of the day, it's all about the outcome.
Now, this idea didn't just pop up out of thin air. It was built up over centuries by some of philosophy's heavy hitters. You've got David Hume kicking things off, then Jeremy Bentham writing the first real, full-blown version. After that, John Stuart Mill wrote his super influential essay that really refined it. And this isn't just history. The theory is very much alive today, with thinkers like Peter Singer using it to tackle huge modern issues.
So, how does this theory actually work? Well, you can think of it as being built on 5 core ideas. These are the essential building blocks that hold the whole thing together.
These are the 5 pillars: consequentialism, welfarism, individualism, aggregation, and maximization. Every single form of utilitarianism is built on these. Together, they create a kind of step-by-step formula for making moral decisions. So let's take a look at each one.
First up, consequentialism. This is the foundation. It says that to figure out if an act is right or wrong, you look only at the results, the consequences. Your intentions don't matter. The rules you might have broken doesn't matter. The only question is, what happened because of what you did?
Okay, so only the consequences matter. But which consequences are good? That's where welfarism comes in. It defines the good as well-being, things like happiness, pleasure, and flourishing. You can almost think of well-being as the currency of morality in this system. It's the only thing we're trying to get more of.
And whose well-being are we talking about? Individualism has the answer. It says that morality is all about the welfare of individuals, sentient beings like people and animals, things that can actually experience happiness or suffering. So the theory isn't concerned with abstract ideas like the good of the nation or the health of the planet, except for how those things end up affecting individuals. And finally, we get to the math part. Aggregation just means we add it all up. You take the well-being of every single individual involved and sum it to get a total score. And then maximization tells us our goal. Make that score as high as you possibly can. It basically turns morality into a kind of ethical calculus.
But, even within this system, there's a huge debate about the best way to apply that calculus. And it splits the whole theory into 2 main camps.
So here's the split. On one side, you've got act utilitarianism. This version says you do the math for every single action. If breaking a promise right here, right now creates just a tiny bit more good in the world, then you should do it. But on the other side, there's rule utilitarianism. This version says, hang on, we should follow the rules that, if everyone followed them, would lead to the greatest good. A rule like, always keep your promises, is generally a good one, so you stick to it, even if breaking it just this one time seems like a good idea.
But this leads to a really powerful criticism of that rule-based approach. I mean, if you know that breaking a specific rule, just this once, will definitely produce a better outcome, but you stick to the rule anyway, aren't you just engaging in rule worship? Aren't you kind of defeating the entire point of the theory, which is to maximize well-being?
And that's not the only headache. The theory as a whole faces some really serious, really persistent criticisms.
Let's look at 3 of the biggest ones. First, there's the rights problem. Since it only cares about the total amount of good, it seems like it would be okay with sacrificing one person for the good of the group. Second, there's the past actions problem. It's all about the future, so it really struggles with stuff like keeping promises or feeling gratitude. And third, and this is a big one, the demandiness problem. As we're about to see, it asks an incredible amount from us.
This brings us to what might be the single most challenging part of the whole theory: how demanding it is. If you take this idea seriously, you are morally obligated to make sacrifices, giving away your time, your money, right up to the point where giving any more would actually harm you more than it would help someone else. For most of us, that would mean a radical, almost saint-like level of personal sacrifice.
But despite all these tough objections, utilitarian thinking has been an incredibly powerful force for social change. So let's look at how it's actually been applied in the real world.
I mean, this way of thinking has been a driving force behind major social movements. We're talking arguments for women's suffrage, the animal liberation movement, and modern efforts for effective global poverty relief. Its intense focus on well-being has often led to some really progressive and sometimes radical conclusions.
And the logic in each case is pure utilitarianism. John Stuart Mill argued that the incredible benefit women would get from equal rights would far, far outweigh any inconvenience to men. Peter Singer argues that the massive suffering of animals on factory farms totally outweighs the minor pleasure humans get from eating cheap meat. You see, it's a simple but really powerful calculation.
And when you apply this to poverty, the argument uses a key economic idea: diminishing marginal utility. Just think about it this way. Giving $1 to someone who has nothing creates a huge amount of well-being. But giving that same dollar to a billionaire, it barely makes a difference. So if your one and only goal is to maximize total well-being, the math is crystal clear. Resources should flow from the very rich to the very poor. This is what gives the theory such radical, redistributive power.
And so we're left with this powerful tension, right? On one hand, utilitarianism offers this clear, rational, impartial way to think about making the world a better place. But on the other hand, it seemed to demand the impossible from us, and maybe at the cost of things we really value, like individual rights. Which brings us to the final question, one for you to think about. Could you actually live your life as a true utilitarian?